It is like I am your slightly sweary, shouty sister, older sister, that's going, you should know this, go back and do something about it. I would say my number one character trait is resilience. You can just knock me down every day and I'll get back up again the next day. Doesn't matter how bad the knockdown is.
Welcome to this week's founder episode of Women Are Good Business, the podcast. And we have, as a guest with us today, the brilliant Lyndsey Simpson. She is the CEO and founder of 55 Redefined, and she is the author of a brilliant new book called The Age Rebellion. So join me in welcoming her to the podcast. Lyndsey, welcome. I'm excited to hear your story today and to share it with our listeners. So we'll kick off with the origin story. I know you started a number of businesses before, you were a serial entrepreneur, but tell us a little bit about what made you want to go into being a founder, and then a little bit about the business you run today.
Yeah, okay. What made me want to be a founder is that I grew up in a family of small business owners. So my dad had a butcher shop when I was very small. Then he bought a post office. My uncle had a pub and restaurant business. And so everywhere I turned, I was surrounded by family members that had small businesses. And that was my youth. Quite frankly, there was no such thing as a weekend. There was no such thing as a work-life balance, because my Sundays were spent delivering meat to customers. My weekends were spent working in a post office, and customers, and we lived on premise. And so I've always been surrounded by businesses, but I knew from a very early age I wanted to run a business, but I didn't want to run a small business. I wanted a big business. And so I was one of the first in my family to go to university. And I landed up in Barclays as one of their graduate recruits, where I was wanted to be a sponge. It's like, give me everything, take me everywhere, send me wherever you like. And I just want to learn everything. I want to learn finance. I want to learn HR. I want to learn marketing. And at the ripe old age of 27, I figured I'd learnt quite a bit. And that was going to be the moment that I was going to let the corporate shackles free and go and start and lead my own business. And so then, if I then come to what was the origins to 55 Redefined, well, a little bit of that history sets the tone, actually. So I was at Barclays for about 7 years. I then, the last business that I owned before this one was a HR and recruitment outsourcer called the Curve Group, where I co-owned that along with the two founding directors. And therefore, I had this mix of understanding financial services and the world of recruitment. And about 6 years ago, NatWest rang me, and they needed to hire back a bunch of retired bankers from the 1990s. Couldn't find any because they were all retired. And they weren't allowed to hire back just their alumni colleagues because the regulator had deemed that they would just be marking their own homework and would recognise the names in the files that they're reviewing. And so they rang me. They're like, you understand financial services, you understand specifically this part of banking, and you understand recruitment. Where do we find people that aren't on LinkedIn, that aren't applying to our job adverts, but that we need to bring back into work? And that was the problem statement that created my eureka moment, Sam, because in just 8 weeks, with outreach on my mobile phone, I still have my Barclays number from the 1990s, I hired back 400 retirees back into work. It was an almost 1-in-1 hit ratio of who we spoke to wanted to return to work. And the overriding theme from all of them was the biggest mistake of their life was retiring.
Wow. And why was that? What were the reasons? Were they very similar reasons, or?
It was, actually. And in fact, I've even given it a name. I've called it the rainbow of retirement. Because what they all described in their own unique way was that they thought retirement was an end point. You know, they thought it was going to be endless rainbows and unicorns and lay-ins and happy holidays and lunch with friends and just this wonderful time. And actually, like all rainbows, it has a brilliant bit and a bright bit, but it has an ending. And so what they all described was that the first 6 months were brilliant. You know, it was the lay-ins, it was that energy that you get from no longer having to be somewhere, work for somebody. And then at the 6 to 12 months point, things become a little bit repetitive. They'd kind of ticked off and raced through their to-do list. They'd done up the house, had the long holiday, they've started their Duolingo Spanish lessons. They were doing all of the things, but life was getting a little bit more repetitive. I could see my mates this weekend, but I saw them last weekend, and I've seen them more in the last 3 months than the last 3 years, and they've got no new news. And I could go to that lovely restaurant for that Wednesday evening deal, but it's not like the big blowout on a Friday night when I'd earned it. And then by the 12 to 18 month point, we saw that people had this huge realization that they had decades in front of them, and they'd never given any time or thought around what were they going to do 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for 30 to 40 years. Because you can have as many hobbies as you like, but that does not fill a week with purpose. And so what we found in that point where people were feeling invisible, they were feeling that they had really lost direction in what they thought they were going to be doing, and were craving actually all of the things they thought they hated about work. Actually, with this new perspective, was like, oh my God, I'd just go and do it for free if I could get back in amongst people and adding value. And so that kind of got me super interested. And so I got census-wide to do a big study of 4,000 over 50s for me to see if I had just picked up on a random sample, so different industries, different demographics. And I found that there was this massive miss between what individuals wanted with all of this extra life that we've been given in life expectancy versus what businesses were serving up in terms of career plans and midlife careers and shortened careers, given, we've added 30 years to life, but not extended out the original retirement age. So I sold my share in that last business and set up, and we launched to market in September 2021.
So tell me, what does 55 Redefined do this? You did the research, you found this massive cohort of kind of older individuals who still had something to give. So kind of what is the purpose of 55 Redefined?
Well, what we do now is very different to what we did when we set up shop back in September 2021.
Tell me that journey.
So when I set up, you've got to remember what was happening in September 2021. So I'd launched the business during COVID. I'd founded it during COVID. So the first 5 employees I'd hired, it was a good 4 or 5 months before I met them in person. They were just hired remotely, didn't know they had bottom halves of their body. We didn't know each other's heights or anything. It was quite interesting meeting colleagues that you've been working with for half a year that you'd never met in person. And the original thesis was that nobody was talking to people, particularly over 50, in the way that I knew everybody over 50 wanted to be talked to. So it was really patronising. It was really kind of cliched and, smiling, grey hair outside of a care home type funeral plans. And I'm like, well, these are the people that are buying all the new cars, that are buying all the clothes, that are having all the holidays, that have got all of the disposable income. So why are we just patronising them? So the original business that we launched was Life Redefined. And then in the answer to the talent challenge that we had, that first gave me the idea, we launched Jobs Redefined and Work Redefined, which were then the B2B kind of solutions. And in my head, Sam, I was going to make a fortune to being the voice of the over 50s to consumers and solving their needs, whether that was around finding a good financial product, whether that was finding a holiday, and all of their lifestyle needs. And the B2B stuff was going to be the cash cow, actually. That's the bit where I had background. I had a reputation of solving for HR functions and chief people officers. So that was just going to provide us with some early income whilst we worked out how do we serve the mass market consumers. We learnt very quickly and very expensively that consumers are not prepared to pay for things themselves, even when they really need them. And we also learned very, very quickly that advertising and reaching mass market consumers, particularly mass affluent over 50s, was hugely expensive because you're then competing with the banks and you're competing with all of the other providers who are trying to target that digital audience. And so we pivoted about 12 months into our journey, where we deemed that our consumers, our over 50s followers, of which there's over 1 million of now, were our audience. And the value that they were going to bring to us was in their data and insight. So we could understand, what do they read, what do they not read, what words do they like, what websites do they hang out on, where do they go from us to. And so we became a free membership platform for over 50s, where they can get all of that inspiration, advice and brilliant content. But our work, our revenues, our commercially would be solving for large corporates. How do we help corporates understand this cohort, either to employ them and keep employing them for longer, or to sell to them as consumers? And so fast forward to where we are now, all of our commercial solutions are around age enabling large organisations, typically over 5,000 employees, on how do they engage and retain over 50s talent and consumers.
So I think that's really interesting. I think that pivot piece is so interesting. And I think it's something that until you run your own business, when you have to pivot because something hasn't worked when you're in a corporate job, if you think back to your corporate days, the jeopardy is really different, right? Because you're still getting paid. You're not the one making sure that, you know, you've got enough money in the bank to pay salaries. That massive pivot, and that's a big pivot for you to have made. And I'm assuming not the first pivot you've made.
It wasn't. Well, actually, I tell you what, this will make me laugh, because up until this year, I owned all of these sites as well. So when I first came up with the idea, in my head, it was going to be called Over 60s Only. And so 0600, I bought every website domain. I was like, I'm owning this because I can see it on TV. It's going to be 060, you know, Over 60s Only, everything. And so I bought all of the assets and did my first bit of market testing. And everybody went, 60's too late. We need to be thinking about this and doing 55. And then all of the data was like 55 is the pivot point. That's the point where most people get divorced. That's the point where most people have family changes. Kids are flying the nest and there's a structural change at home. It's the age where people in the UK can access their pensions. And so they start getting financial advice. It's the age where people feel most likely to be able to reskill and change career. So we became 55 Redefined and owned that. And we still own that. We go to market. But our work now solves for every age. And even when we're doing solutions for our clients in midlife, they typically draw the line at 40 plus. So I was like, we had to make a decision. Are we just going to keep renaming ourselves? Are we going to become like midlife redefined, or are we going to be like 40 redefined or 50 redefined? And we thought, you know what, at some point we've built over the last 5 years a reputation and credibility, and people know us as 55 redefined. And we just have to sometimes explain that we're not just about the over 55 cohort, but once they get there, and then we work with everybody of every age to remove any age-related barriers that they have around work or business.
Yeah, and how do you handle those pivots as a founder, right? So there's there's that, do we change the name? Do we not? And I think that's the strength of the brand, that you haven't and it still works. But when you're pivoting away from, this is our core idea here, oh, that doesn't work. I mean, how do you handle that? Like, that's a really difficult process to go through, I think. Yeah. So tell me how do you handle that as a founder?
You have to get really used to everybody telling you that your baby's ugly. That's the best way I can describe it. It's literally the best. You think you've built something that is beautiful and it's amazing and everyone's going to love it. And everybody's a bloody critic, Sam. Everybody's going to go, oh, well, not sure about the colour palette, or not sure about this, or... And so you at this point as a founder, you have two choices. You either get defensive. You either are like, no, I think you'll find that my baby's really bloody attractive, thanks very much, and this is why, and I'm going to justify why we do what we do or we exist. Or you get more opinions. You get more opinions and you start to say, actually, there's something in this. As with always, there's going to be a level of feedback that you're just going to have to filter out and ignore, and there's outliers that they don't get it. No one's going to, you can't make everybody get what you do. So filter those out. But if you suddenly find that you've got a chunk of people who are saying a similar kind of thing, then your job as a founder is to listen to your customers and go where they are. So, this is my 8th business, and none of them have I invented something that doesn't exist in a real sense. I'm not Apple. I've not invented the iPhone. And so I'm a founder that solves business and people's problems. And therefore, the way you are successful is by realising that the speed that you pivot and the speed that you listen to market feedback and you go in the direction of where there's a revenue trail or that there's some commercial interest, That is what defines success, not that what you thought you were going to do is still the same and nobody's buying it, but your baby's really pretty.
I love that. That's so going to end up as a reel, Lyndsey. I'm just saying that that's definitely going to end up one of the reels for socials. But so, kind of taking on us on that journey, then, either from the existing business or previous businesses, like what are the moments? I think sometimes as a founder, it's really hard to stop and take stock of what you have achieved.
Yeah.
Like, what are the moments that are your real highs, like where you've been super proud of something you've achieved in
So
business?
you're quite right. And me personally, I'm a very forward thinking person. So I need to have people around me that remind me to reflect, and also remind me to celebrate the wins, because I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that was great. And what we're going to do next week? And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Can we just like, have a moment, please? Because, last week was pretty bloody awesome. So I do make sure that I share, particularly with my senior people, that I have a habit, a trait of just chasing forward, and sometimes I need to be reminded and pulled back into the present of what are we doing. But for me, the moments are really around other people. So for this particular business, I remember we'd been trading less than a year, and a complete stranger in Australia on LinkedIn had done a big post about us. They'd found our site and they'd done something, and they had a look at it, but a big post about us. And the opening line was the world is going to be a better place because 55 Redefined exist. And I still remember it, and it made me cry, and it still brings me to feel quite emotional, because I thought in that moment, and you have to have these moments because it's tough being a founder, and you will have probably more bad days than you have good days, in terms of leading a business that you've founded yourself. And so taking those moments and reminding yourself as to the why, and my why, which runs through everything I do, is that I want to enable everyone everywhere to feel inspired and not retired. I don't want these 400 people I spoke to 6 years ago that are living in regret, saying that they made the worst mistake of their life. I want everybody to have agency to make a choice about their future. That means that they don't have the regret, but also we have the foundations around us in business that means that they can thrive, and we get rid of this kind of talk down narrative that we have around age. So that's my personal way. So when you then start getting this echoed back, and then I've become a little bit famous for saying, if you don't have an age strategy, you don't have a growth strategy. And just last week I was at an event and someone quoted it back to me, not knowing it was my statement. I'm like, these are the moments. These are the moments where you're making cut through, when people around the world are recognizing that actually, yes, we're a commercial business, we are a for-profit business, and we're not frightened of that, but we leave the world in a better place having existed than if we didn't.
And I think it's an ethos you see in lots of very successful businesses. And when I say successful, I mean like successful for sustainability for the long term, not from a climate perspective, but just an ongoing profitability. And we also see that very common in women who run businesses, is we want that bigger picture. We want to deliver something bigger and longer.
Yeah.
On that topic, how have you obviously you've only ever been a female founder, but how have you found being a female founder? And do you think it is different to being a male founder?
100%. I mean, in so many ways. So I remember maybe 3 years ago, I was on holiday. I get my best ideas on holiday. So I consume business books. I take a notepad, and I love those holiday times because I refresh, and but I come up with good ideas.
So
Right?
basically, your
And
brain never stops, is what you're telling
no,
me, which I think is very
it
common for a
doesn't.
founder.
No,
It's like you
it does.
get 30 seconds of nothing and you're like, oh, I've got another new idea.
Your business plan. I mean, don't get me wrong, my team hate me going on holiday, but no, I love going on holiday to get all these ideas. And so I came back about 3 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, well, I need holidays because that's where I get my ideas. So you'll need holidays. So let's, really ramp up our holiday entitlement. So you've got like 35 days, and you've got bank holidays, and, really be better than large corporate organizations. And I remember male founders, and some investors that were just like, "Are you nuts? I mean, why? You're a small business. You're not profitable. You're in a cash burn position, and let and yet you think that giving away loads of holiday is going to be the right thing to do. And I'm like, yeah, it is the right thing to do, because I want people that are energized, and being in a small scale up business is hard work. It's exhausting. You're being strategic, you're being tactical every minute of every day. And and we found very, very quickly that it was quite a key recruitment differentiator. We can't, nobody works for us because they're going to get a massive pay rise versus another organisation. That's not why they're joining. So it is around the things around the fact that we respect what people bring, and we respect that actually people need downtime. And I think that's quite a female trait in many ways. The other bit where it's been probably quite I suppose apparent has obviously been in the investment space, where I genuinely thought that I wouldn't have any challenges fundraising, because I'm a banker by background. I used to lead an M&A team in a bank. I then had previous businesses that had millions of lines of credit from banks. And I am not a shy wallflower kind of a female founder. I am a super confident female founder who's been there and done it 7 times before. And yet this is the first business that required outside investment rather than bank funding. And I couldn't believe how difficult it was. And I couldn't believe the rooms that I found myself in, and some of the conversations that I was having with potential investors that literally just eye-watering that it's still existing in this day and age.
And I was going to touch on investment and funding, because you, like me, come from a finance background, and I think you can kind of come from that world and assume it's quite straightforward, especially when you've done it in other businesses, right? So talk to me about that investment journey and the things that really struck you that are different because you're a female founder, or you believe are different because you're a female founder?
So we've raised to date just over 8 million so far, and the majority, that's a 6.5 of that, is equity investment, and 1.5 of that is debt as the instrument. Where we found ourselves is, and we have no VCs on our cap table, so we don't have any VC investment to this point. So I found myself really in the early days thinking this would be such a clear VC investment. We're a tech business, we're scale up, we're working with large corporates. It's a classic opportunity for VC investment. And I was asked questions. I was asked to pipe down and let the men talk in one meeting. I was told the first thing that an investor would do would be replace me, because I'm not a tech native founder. And strangely enough, I wasn't that tempted to take money from people. Yeah, so the first thing you can do is fire me. Right, okay, right. Or I could just be in a corner somewhere, coming up with the ideas, and someone else is the CEO. And so really, really just bizarre views around how people need to be. Our main core business now is SaaS. It's a SaaS product, and so, but because I didn't come from that background, just a complete astonishment that, well, how can you possibly run a SaaS business if you're not a coder or a developer by background? Because I can hire people, I can listen to customers, and I can sell stuff. So get those 3 things right, and you can generally lead a business regardless of what it's selling. So I found that quite astonishing. So our first 2 waves of founders were all angel investors. And they were predominantly female. And so without those early doors female investors, I certainly wouldn't have got men on the cap table. And so I'm very grateful to those women who have a investment thesis that they want to pay it forward, and they want to invest in other women. That then enabled us to bring some male angel investors. And then 2 years ago, we brought in our first institutional investor, which is a FTSE 200 insurer. So not a VC, but somebody that is interested in our topic because it adds value to their topic area as a later life retirement product provider. So they want to understand the insight. And And the bit that then still astounds me is that, we are now 5 years into our journey with 8 million of funding and corporate lines, and I still can't even get a £10 overdraft from my bank, because of the nature of these businesses do not fund scale up tech businesses. The banking system is not designed for businesses that are generating cash, but are cash negative in terms of their growth trajectory. So they just focus only on profit. And that astounds me, absolutely astounds me. And so where does that leave me? So as a final piece to this, I think that I have diluted far more as a female founder than any of the male equivalent founders that I see in the marketplace, particularly our friends over in the US, who have much easier time when it comes in terms of access for capital. And so for me, let's fast forward 5-10 years. What does that do? That means that my payday will be proportionately smaller than it would have been if I'd been male, which then impedes my ability to pay it forward, invest in more female founders. And so we're just continuing to perpetuate the fact that it's just much harder to access capital as a female founder, which is sadly just the reality of what we face.
And I was going to ask you, what do you think the biggest issue is? But I'm going to frame it because I think you've touched on something which I think is really important. Now, you and I both grew up in banking, so we know cash is king, right? So if you've got investment coming in, it makes no sense that you can't get backing from the banks if you look at it from a really practical perspective. Interesting as well, there's some new statistics coming out which show that women are statistically more likely to pay back debt. They're also statistically less likely to go insolvent. So actually, over the long term, backing women is actually a safer bet. But the reaction of the industry is different. So, is that kind of the banks understanding how your business works and how what a female founder brings to the table? Is that the biggest issue, or is it a wider issue? As you said, you had trouble with early investment anyway from men and from VCs. Kind of what do you think needs to change in the ecosystem, so that women who've got great ideas like you have, and you've proven it now, kind of going against the grain, like what are the things the ecosystem needs to change?
So it needs new products. So, my access to capital is expensive. So at the time of being recorded, my debt line is a 15% quarterly compounding coupon. So, and at 1.6 million of a debt line, that means I'm paying hundreds of thousands back over the course of the next 2 years in interest alone, because there is no other access to debt. There are no instruments. So you're relying on personal investors who have got then a convertible loan note instrument. So they can, if I failed to pay, then they have a convert into equity. So there's a safety net there. But then it has a really high coupon rate, because when that instrument came out a couple of years ago, we were in a higher rate of interest. And individuals aren't banks. So they're going to price it at a point way higher than a bank, because they're like, well, I'm not a bank. So there's just higher risk to getting the money back. And so I get that then banks are risk averse. What we need is a market in the middle of these two things. We need somewhere where, it's higher than the banks because it has got a higher risk profile to it, but it's not as extreme. Maybe it's at an 8 to 10%, and it therefore has, some security nets in terms of assets. But the bit that I do find uncomfortable is that founders are still asked to give them personal guarantees against things. So, it's my 8th business. I'm in my late 40s. How many more decades do I have to put my house up against a privately owned business that I own, 36% of? It is not proportionate, and it's not appropriate for that type of position. And so, I just think there's a real missed middle here. We've got bank products which are brilliant if you're a long trading business or a smaller business that's just, profitable and small, but it doesn't work for scale up businesses that are seeking investment. And then you have the private structures that you can get from wealthy investors, but they come with an expensive price ticket. And so, there's just this middle that is just invisible, unfortunately.
Yeah. And what it's doing is really slowing the ability for businesses like yours to scale, right? Because, and that scale is what benefits the economy.
100%.
And that is, So, the ecosystem needs to evolve and adapt, because it's not like SaaS businesses are new, right? It's not like, businesses that are pre-profit, but with
Yeah.
revenue, they're not
Yeah.
new. This is not something
No.
that just appeared last week. This is something that's been happening for
No.
years, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, it's not like you've never done it before.
Yeah, yeah, and it is the marketplace. I mean, you have to look at well-known names like Ocado, who I've been shopping with for Christ since they started maybe 15, 20 years ago. Um, they're still pre-profit.
Mm.
They're in a cash burn scenario, and look at how many people they employ in the size, because they have investors that are taking a long-term view
Yeah.
that this type of investment in technology that is transforming industries has a completely different profile to it, to a I'm going to sell something, I'm going to make a profit, and I'm going to organically grow. And, we have an opportunity with the globalization of our markets, and the barriers coming down with tech, that any business, any founder now can be selling anywhere in the world. So the marketplace is open, which means it does require capital to access those marketplaces at pace, rather than assuming it used to be that you'd trade in the UK for 10 years and then you'd think about going across the pond. Well, I think we'd been trading 12 months before we got our first US customer. So, none of the previous logic stands up, but the system around us, around capital access, hasn't changed in that time
Yeah.
frame.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on with Ocado kind of recruiting and employing people, and I want to pivot to talking a bit about that. One, because I know it's an area you know really well, but also because I think it's one of those biggest challenges. As you said, the first 6 employees you recruited, you didn't meet in person for quite a long time because of COVID. So as a founder, we sometimes think the hardest thing is coming up with the idea as
Yeah,
opposed to doing it. But I think recruiting is getting recruitment right is really hard, right?
yeah,
Getting it
yeah.
wrong, I think, is quite easy. But tell me, can you tell us a little bit about the challenges you face in recruitment and any advice or guidance given you were a recruiter and you
Yeah.
deal with a lot of people today? Kind of what advice, what advice and guidance you'd give to any founder who's looking to recruit?
Yeah, absolutely. So get your story. So, people are going to, it's a risky business, someone leaving a role in a safe, reliable employer to come and work for a startup business, or scale up business. And so you need to have a really strong founder story around what is the why of the business, what is it you're solving and how are you going to do it? And what is that going to look like over the next 2, 3, 4 years? So they understand the journey for a company, not just the individual role. You also then need to lean in on the stuff that is non-financial. So for me, I talked about holiday. So we do. In fact, I'll show you my little teddy here. Little duvet day. So each year we do little things so people can have a duvet day, so they can call the ripcord and don't need to give us a reason. Just go, do you know what, today I'm gonna take a well-being day. Thanks very much. So these little things that we do, little gifts, little ideas that are lower from a financial perspective, but have huge meaning to individuals that are in the journey. So that's one piece of it. Second piece of it is really think about how you're going to structure your team. Where I see most founders make the mistake is they hire mini me's all around them. So they have people that are all one side of the disc profile, or they're all extrovert, or they're all really good at something, but then you've got deficiencies around the rest of the business. And so I've always made it a purpose to hire people who are noticeably different to me. I don't need another me in the business. I've got me. So, but I need to fill all of the things that I'm not so good at, and that other people can do better. And then likewise, they need support in constructing their teams so that they hire really different people to themselves. That is hard to do because what it creates is conflict, is because you will then have people that are reflectors and introverts facing into people that are extroverts and culture differences. You'll have people who are coming from different age perspectives or different diversity perspectives. And so I think, again, the key to this is telling everybody that you are doing this intentionally. You are intentionally creating an environment where there is constructive conversation about topics. but everybody is hired on the basis that they want the same thing, which is, in our world, is to enable everyone to feel inspired and not retired. So if they're getting passionate about something, it's because they want to fix it. It's not because they're trying to prove a point. So that's the bit. And then the final bit, again, would be very, very careful in your early couple of years about equity giveaways. So people will try and do pro bono deals. You come and work for me for 50% reduced pay and I'll give you 1%, 5% of equity in return. The people that you need in your first 12 to 18 months are not the people that you're going to need in years 2 to 5, and they're not the people that you're going to need in years 5 to 10. And that's just a fact of a scaling business. You'll find a few people that are keepers that can evolve with you, that really have that ability to go from small and nimble and then lead a big business. But they are few and far between. And so it's better off to not pretend that you're going to have somebody and give them a job for life, and actually just go, this is the mission for the next 18 months. And are you in on this? And then we're going to review what that mission is again, and we're going to review what that mission is again. And then my final piece is always hire for what you need tomorrow, not what you need today. So the pace of a scale up and business, the danger is you hire too junior because you hire what you can afford, but you're better off hiring the more senior person 3 days a week than you are the more junior person 5 days a week, knowing that they are going to be able to take you there faster and you can build underneath them rather than then having layers join above them, which is always really quite hard from a cultural perspective.
I feel like I've just had a masterclass in recruitment, Lyndsey. Thank you. I love it.
Well, I did have it for 14 years, so I hope
exactly, yeah, absolutely. So I've got another question around that is, what do you do if you have recruited the wrong person? How as a founder do you deal with that?
Quickly. It's the shortest answer. So no one wants death by 1,000 cuts, ever. I am a big believer that if you've spotted that if your intuition is telling you that something's not quite right, don't ignore your intuition, because you'll just end up adding 6 months onto that process and not making the decision you need to do. So I think act swiftly and really respectfully. So there are probably hundreds of people over the last 25 years that I've had to move on from businesses that I've led, and all of them I hope would still think very positively of me, say that I did it with compassion, say that I did absolutely everything in finding them a home and somewhere else to move to, and support them around that process, but it would have all been done very swiftly. So if it wasn't a redundancy process, it would just be, this is where this is heading, here's a settlement agreement, this is what my thoughts are, and this is how I can help you to find a home that you're going to be better on. And then I find that people just want to know the facts. They don't want to be dancing around a process for weeks and months to come with that uncertainty. And then as long as you're going to, and if it's impacting a few people, then again, do cut deeper rather than go again. So no one, otherwise everybody's looking over their shoulder all the time going, is this going to happen again? Is it going to be me next, etc. So it's almost like if you need to do a cost-cutting exercise, go deep, do it once, do it, with care and compassion, and let everybody know exactly what's happening in the process and why. And if you're employing adults, which I'm hoping everybody that's listening to this are, and not children, well, then treat them like adults, would be my advice.
Yeah, I think it's so important. It's funny, someone I made redundant in my old corporate job a long time ago, who's still a really good friend today, at the time was devastated because she was still only in her 20s, and she will tell anybody who asks now it was the best thing that could ever have happened to her, because she was a square peg in a round hole, and she went off and had and did the things she wanted to. And the best piece of advice I've ever been given on recruitment, actually might have been from you, and we used to do some recruiting together, possibly. It may not have been you, but
claim
it. Claim it. Someone said to me once, if your gut doesn't say yes, don't recruit. You're better without someone than having the 100%. Wrong person in a role, because actually 100%. Then you just have to get rid of them, and that takes so much energy.
Just keep your bar high. I mean, we work with Amazon, and they have a great role in their business, which is called a bar raiser. So in every recruitment process, regardless of the role, you will have a bar raiser, trained bar raiser, who comes into the recruitment process, who's nothing to do with the department that's hiring, the hiring manager. They're just someone completely independent, that's job is there to raise the bar, is to make sure that they are bringing in top talent through that process. And I think it is that you're better off having an empty seat than you are filling it with someone that you're thinking, oh, well, it's, they're breathing, and they can fill a role, they're not perhaps my dream candidate. Yeah. Because they'll feel it as well, because you're then not going to be giving them your best self and investing in them. And so, kind of, if you're going to make a decision to hire, then you go all in and you're like, I am not going to set them up to fail. I'm going to do my absolute level best to make them successful in this role. But if you're hanging back thinking, oh, I'm not so sure, don't hire. Just keep going again, as painful as that is.
Yeah, agreed. Every time I've ignored that gut, it's always ended up with me having to exit them, and that is just excruciating and expensive, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think we could talk about recruitment for hours, and I think we'll probably have to get you back on as an expert and get some of the founders asking you questions around recruitment. But on this, back to kind of talking about age and the impact of age on people's lives and how they live their life. Obviously, you're in a SaaS B2B business now. I know you've had a number of different businesses over the years, but you've now, I'm going to say a pivot, but it's not really a pivot, have now written a book. So called The Age Rebellion. So very much on a theme.
Here's one Excellent. I prepared earlier.
Excellent. And we will put a link in the show notes for anyone who would like to go and buy it. So tell me, why did you write a book?
Yeah.
And what is it about?
Okay. Well, I never had a plan to write a book. So I'm not one of those people that's kind of been saying for years, I've got a book in me. I didn't think I did at all, actually. So it was complete serendipity that I happened to meet people that suggested I should write a book, and gave me the time and their wisdom into the publishing industry to say, actually, there's a real gap around this in the topic. So rather than describe the process of that bit of it, the more the why did I write it? And it's a consumer book. So my life is B2B. So I'm speaking one to many. I'm looking at employees in their thousands. But what I found very interesting for the last few years is I do a lot of conference speaking, a lot of stage speaking. And it doesn't matter what the room is, whether they're all employees of one company or whether it's like 1,000 people at LinkedIn, I will end up with my inbox on LinkedIn full every time I've been on stage with people going, can I just grab half an hour for a coffee? I'm a little bit lost about what to do next, or, my husband's just been made redundant at 58 and, is struggling really of what to do. And I thought you could maybe give us some pointers. And I'm a people pleaser for some things. And so I found it really, really difficult to say to 100 people each time, I don't have 130-minute time slots, and I'm not a coach. It's not what I do. But I have learned over the years that I have a lot of information that I've garnered from being in this privileged position of understanding at depth, how do we have longer, healthier lives? How do we improve our health span? How do we improve our work prospects? How do we thrive in the second phase of life? And so for me, the book is my manifesto. It's my call to arms. It is like I am your slightly sweary, shouty sister, older sister that's going, you should know this, and go fucking do something about it. So it's not woo-woo. It's not going to go like lie on a beach, think about when you were happy. None of that. It's like, you need to know this. This is an exercise. Go do this. Think about this. I'm going to work through a scenario. I'm going to talk about all the challenging stuff, divorce, death, midlife, but with the entire purpose that it's an inspirational book, really, that enables people to create a plan for the next phase of life. And if you think back to what my personal mission is, so why do I get out of bed every day to enable everyone to feel inspired and not retired? Well, the final bit that took me over was that less than 5% of the world's population work for large corporates. So the other 95% of people that are self-employed or stay-at-home parents, or working in a small business, they don't know that they're going to live to 104. They don't know how to extend their careers or start a business in their 60s. But I do. And so for me, it was like, how do I get that message? How do I give everybody agency? And then commercially, because you'll know, Sam, I'm a commercial person. So commercially, if I've got everyone in midlife, literally building this rebellion going, actually, I demand more and I'm not going to go quietly into the night, then that will force the hand of some of those big companies and employers who aren't taking this topic seriously to realise that 50% of the workforce are over 50 and they need to be listened to. And we need a new path for work that's going to last us through the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Well, I can't wait to read it. By the time this goes out, it will have been released. So
yes, it
they can
publishes
definitely go and get it.
7th of May in the UK, Australia and India, and the 12th of May in the US and Canada.
Brilliant. Excellent. So we will definitely put it in the show notes. So we're coming almost to the end of the episode. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions around mindset and what the future for your business is. So just on the mindset piece, for you, what's the most important thing you've learned around mindset as a founder that's made you successful?
I would say my number one character trait is resilience. You can just knock me down every day and I'll get back up again the next day. It doesn't matter how bad the knockdown is. It doesn't matter how disappointing the news is. I will dust myself down and get back up. But I do that because I found strategies. So I have ways of lightening my mood and seeing perspective, which help me. And they can be really simple things. So for me, 5 minutes dancing does me a world of good. I'm having a crap day, I'm going to stick on some, really loud music and dance for 5 minutes. And actually, then I'm like, actually, it's not quite so bad. I've put a rebounder, like the little trumpet things. So not where I am today, but in my home office, I have a rebounder. So when I'm having kind of a stressful call or I'm thinking about the next thing, I will just bounce. I'll bounce on the rebounder. It's really difficult to get angry when you're on a trampoline. And so there's just these little things where, because in the moment you could feel like the world is ending, you haven't got the funding, you've lost that big customer, you can't see the cash flow beyond the end of the nose, and how are you going to pay this month's payroll? But there's always an answer and there's always a way. But if you wallow in it for more than, give yourself the night, there's going to be some knockbacks that you're going to go, right, actually, I'm going to go and get myself a gin and tonic and screw this because this is a crap day. But you just then have to wake up a fresh day the following morning and go, right, today's about solving for it. So how do I pivot? How do I go in a different path? What's the solution? And I think if you can develop that, then you will find that you can be a founder for the rest of your life. If you don't develop it, it could be quite a lonely, depressing place where actually you'd be thinking, why on earth did I ever leave the comfort of corporate land where, my pay and everybody else's wasn't on my shoulders? But resilience and finding the strategies that work for you would be my answer.
Brilliant. Excellent. And finally then, what is the future for 55 Redefined and for you? What's next?
So we've gone from being a consumer business to a talent platform to having B2B digital and consulting solutions to last year launching our first ever SaaS product. And I predict that within 12 months, SaaS will probably make up 80+% of our revenues. And therefore, what that requires for us is how do we streamline what we do? We can't just keep adding and going broader. We need to focus on where we can have the most impact globally on people. So for me personally, it's going all in on that SaaS product. The largest chunk of that 8 million of funding has been building, launching, testing that, and owning the IP for that product. So rolling that out internationally and really getting excited by how AI being built in on that journey is enabling us to move to different countries, different languages, different optionality way quicker than when we were 2 years ago on our product development. So that's the bit. And then personally, obviously, I'm a first-time author, so I've got no idea what that's going to bring in terms of consumer. The time of doing this, I know I've just been booked in to be the front cover of the Telegraph in next month before this is published. So I've got all of these consumer outlets and media channels around the world who I've never really engaged with because I've been more of an FT and a Times girl. So I'm very curious to see in a year's time what it's going to mean having this dual profile of, bit like Superman, day job, CEO, B2B business. And then of an evening and a weekend, I'm a consumer person and an author doing festivals and things like that. So no idea, but they're the two big paths, I think, in the next 12 months.
Brilliant. Excellent. Lyndsey, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Hopefully the people listening have learned a lot. I think resilience has come out really strongly. I think that advice you've given around recruiting as a founder is really powerful, and I know people have benefited. So thank you for spending your time with us, and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of Women Are Good Business podcast, and thank you for listening. Now I need your help. We want to make the podcast huge. We want more people to hear about the stories of female founders. We want to get the best experts in the world so we can grill them with your questions, and we can only do that if people know where to find us. So please help us make the podcast go viral. Like, follow, subscribe, leave us a review, drop us into a WhatsApp group. Whatever is the best way to share, please do share and come with us on the journey as we talk to lots of female founders and we show the world that women really are good business.